She didn't knock. She walked straight into the post office, slapped the sealed envelope on the counter, and said, "Send it today, before I change my mind." The postmistress looked at the address. Her face went pale. Nathaniel Brooks, personal correspondence. Harlan County. "Amelia," she whispered. "Do you understand what you're doing?" Amelia pressed her scarred hand flat on the counter, no glove. No shame, no apology, and looked her dead in the eye. 23 families are going to lose everything by winter, she said. Somebody has to say something. It might as well be me. If this story moves something in you, subscribe right now. Follow Amelia all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Amelia Carter's mother decided her oldest daughter had become a problem. She didn't shout, she didn't cry. She sat across the breakfast table, folded her napkin with both hands, and said in the same tone she used to discuss weather or grocery accounts, "I've made arrangements. You'll leave Thursday." Amelia set down her fork. "Leave," she said. "The farmhouse, outside Willow Creek." Her mother didn't look up. "Your father's old property. It's been sitting empty." "You'll be comfortable." "Comfortable," Amelia repeated. The word sat between them like something dead. Her younger sister Clara kept her eyes on her plate. Didn't speak. Amelia noticed. She filed it away. "Mother," she said very carefully, "what did I do?" Her mother finally looked at her. And what Amelia saw in that look wasn't anger, wasn't cruelty, it was something far worse. Practicality. "The Whitmore boy has expressed serious interest in Clara," her mother said. "Railroad family. Excellent standing. His mother came to tea last week and she was watching everything very closely. And you were in the room." "Amelia." Her mother's voice didn't waver. "With your hand?" "The scar." "Always the scar. A childhood fall from a horse 9 years old. A bad landing, her right hand catching on a fence post. It had healed clean, it didn't hurt. It was simply there, pale and jagged, running from the base of her thumb to the inside of her wrist, and her mother had decided, years ago, that it was the most important fact about her." "I see," Amelia said. "This isn't permanent," her mother said, folding her napkin again unnecessarily. "Once Clara is settled, we'll reassess. It's simply a matter of timing." Amelia pushed back her chair. She stood up. She looked at her mother, really looked. The way you look at something when you're deciding whether to fight it or walk away from it forever. Then she walked out of the room. She went upstairs. She packed one carpet bag. She came back down. Her mother was still at the table. "Thursday," Amelia said from the doorway. "I'll be ready." She didn't wait for a response. The farmhouse was worse than she'd imagined and better than she deserved. Which was to say, it was nothing empty rooms, a stove that barely held heat, a well that tasted like iron, a roof with one soft corner that dripped when it rained. She arrived on a Thursday in March. By Friday morning she had every room catalogued. By Saturday she had the stove working. By Sunday she had introduced herself to the neighbor, an old farmer named Silas Webb. 63 years old, hands so bent with arthritis he could barely grip a fence post, who stared at her from his porch like she'd appeared out of thin air. "You're the Carter girl," he said. "I am. They said you were sick. They were mistaken." He chewed on that a moment. "You know anything about farming?" he said. "Not yet," she said. "But I'm standing here instead of somewhere else. That ought to count for something." He looked at her for a long moment. Looked at her hand, didn't comment on it. "Come back tomorrow," he said. Sunrise. She was there before sunrise. 3 years passed. They pass the way hard years do, not quickly, not slowly, but with the particular weight of time that's filled with actual work. Amelia learned what Silas taught her, and then kept learning past what he knew. She read. She kept records. She made herself useful to every family in Willow Creek County who would let her, and slowly, one season at a time, they let her. She wasn't the Carter girl who'd been sent away anymore. She was simply Amelia, the woman at the old Webb farmhouse who knew things, kept good accounts, and showed up when people needed her. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. It was, she had come to realize, the first real life she'd ever had. And then the river started dying. It happened slowly enough that people told themselves it wasn't happening. The Black Hollow River fed 500 acres of farmland across the eastern part of Willow Creek County. It had run steady for 60 years. It was not a dramatic river. It didn't flood, didn't rage, didn't make itself known. It simply ran, season after season, the way essential things do then. 18 months ago, it began to slow. October, the wrong month for drought. The wrong month for any natural reason at all, Silas noticed first. He was sitting at Amelia's kitchen table one evening, turning a coffee cup in his crooked hands, and he said it so quietly that at first she wasn't sure she'd heard him right. "Someone's diverting it," he said. She looked up from her ledger. "Are you certain? Been watching water my whole life." His jaw was tight. "That river doesn't slow in October. Somebody's got a channel or a dam running north of the county line, pulling the flow away from us. And I got a real good idea who. Meridian Land and Water," she said. He nodded. "They bought that parcel north of the river 8 months ago. You remember everyone said it was just investment land. No development planned. Except they developed it." Amelia sat back. Meridian Land and Water Company was not a name that meant much to ordinary people. It was incorporated in the state capital, operated through subsidiary offices and land agents, and existed mostly on paper except for the very real consequences it left behind. And Meridian, everyone knew, was owned entirely by the Brooks estate. Nathaniel Brooks, the most powerful private landowner in the state. "Nobody's going to say anything," Silas said. He wasn't being cynical. He was just telling her what was true. These families can barely hold on as it is. They can't afford lawyers. They can't afford to make enemies of a man like Brooks. "What about Commissioner Hale?" Silas made a short, humorless sound. "Hale had dinner with 3 Brooks managers last month," he said. "Real nice restaurant. Someone picked up the check." Amelia was quiet for a long moment. "The Kellerman family," she said finally. 4 children. They'll be out of water entirely by spring if this continues. Yes, the Birch property. Eastfield is already cracking. Yes, and nobody is going to do anything." Silas looked at her. "Nobody has anything left to fight with," he said. She looked down at her ledger, at 3 years of careful records farm by farm, season by season. "I do," she said. She wrote 5 drafts. The first was pure anger, all heat. No precision. A letter like that gets thrown in a fire. She burned it herself. The second was too careful, too measured. No pulse. She burned that one too. The third was too long. The fourth apologized for itself before it even made its argument. She pressed both flat and dropped them in the stove without ceremony. The 5th draft she wrote in a single sitting past midnight, by the light of a lamp that needed oil, and when she read it back, she knew it was right. Not because it was perfect, because it was honest. Because it said exactly what needed saying and nothing else. "Mr. Brooks, your company's mismanagement of water rights has caused documented harm to 23 farming families in Willow Creek County. I have compiled records of the damage names, dates, figures, including correspondence from your own managers that was falsified before it reached your office. I am writing to you directly because I believe you may not know the full extent of what is being done in your name. If that belief is wrong and you do know, then this letter serves a different purpose. If you are unwilling or unable to act, I will bring these records to every newspaper in the state capital that will receive me. I do not write this as a threat. I write it as a statement of intent. Silence is no longer an option for me. Amelia Rose Carter, Willow Creek County," she sealed it. She sat with it in her hands for a long time. She thought about her mother's voice. This is for the best. She thought about 3 years of being erased. She thought about the Kellerman children, about Silas's hands, about the Eastfield cracking open in the August heat. She put on her coat. She walked to the post office before sunrise. The postmistress's name was Ruth Haggerty, and she had worked that counter for 22 years and seen most of what Willow Creek County had to offer. She looked at the envelope. She looked at the address. She looked at Amelia. Nathaniel Brooks, she said. Personal correspondence, that's correct. Ruth set the envelope on the counter slowly. The way you set down something you're not sure is safe to hold. Amelia, she said quietly, do you understand what happens if he takes offense? A man like that doesn't just ignore people who cross him. He makes sure they stay crossed. Then he makes sure, Amelia said. But those families don't have 3 more seasons to wait for someone braver than me to come along. Ruth looked at her for a long moment. She picked up the stamp. She pressed it down hard. Lord help you, she said. I'll take whatever help I can get, Amelia said. And she walked out into the cold morning air before her hands could start shaking. They started shaking halfway home. She kept walking. The town found out within 4 days. Small towns have their own kind of telegraph, faster than wire, crueler than print. By the end of the week, everyone in Willow Creek knew that the Carter woman out at the old farmhouse had written a personal letter to Nathaniel Brooks. The reactions were not kind. She heard them herself. Standing just outside the open door of the dry goods store on a Thursday afternoon, having arrived 2 minutes too early and stopped at the sound of her own name. It's embarrassing, said a woman's voice she recognized, Mrs. Alderton, the merchant's wife. A woman in her situation acting like she has standing to challenge a man like that. It's worse than embarrassing, said another voice. It's dangerous. If Brooks decides to make an example, she'll bring it down on all of us, said a third. That's what happens when someone with nothing left to lose decides to act like they have something to say. Nothing left to lose. Amelia stood very still outside the door. She felt the words land, felt the particular sting of them. Specific and practiced. The way you feel a thing that's been said about you 100 times in 100 different rooms. Then she straightened her back. She pushed the door open. The 3 women turned. The conversation stopped. Amelia walked to the counter, purchased the flour and salt she'd come for, said good afternoon to no one in particular, and walked back out. She held her back straight the entire way home. She held it straight until she was inside with the door shut. Then she sat down at the kitchen table, pressed both palms flat on the wood, the scarred hand and the plain one, side by side, and breathed. 23 families. She told herself, keep going. She got up. She went back to work. On the 3rd morning after the letter was sent, Silas Webb came to her door at a dead run, or as close to a dead run as a man his age with his joints could manage, which is to say he was moving faster than she'd ever seen him move. His coat half-buttoned, his face somewhere between alarm and disbelief. He didn't knock. He banged. She opened the door. Rider on the North Road, he said. Breathless, not 1 rider, 3, coming from Harlan County direction. Fast horses. Good ones. She felt the shift happen somewhere in her chest, a lurch. A tightening. Could be, he said. Ain't though. I know what company horses look like. Amelia, those are Brooks' horses. The silence stretched for exactly 3 seconds. How long? She said. 15 minutes. She looked at him. He looked at her. Go home, Silas, she said quietly. This is my business. Like hell it is, he said. You wrote that letter on behalf of every family in this county. I'm staying, she almost argued. Instead, she nodded. Give me 5 minutes, she said. She went inside. She changed her work apron for a clean one. She did not change her dress. She did not arrange her hair into anything careful. She did not open the drawer where she kept her long gloves. She stood in front of the small square mirror on the wall and looked at her right hand. The scar caught the morning light, pale, permanent, entirely visible. She thought about every time she had covered it. Every dinner party where she'd kept that hand in her lap. Every introduction where she'd angled her body away. Every moment of automatic, exhausted management of what other people might think if they saw it too clearly. She was done with that. She walked outside. The first thing she noticed about Nathaniel Brooks was that he looked like a man who hadn't slept in 2 days, and hadn't let it stop him. He pulled his horse to a halt at the edge of her property line. His coat was travel-worn and mud-caked past the knees. There was a set to his jaw that suggested the ride hadn't been comfortable, and he hadn't cared. His two companions, one in a suit that had not traveled as well as he had, one who had the look of a man used to covering rough country, stopped several lengths behind him. Reading the situation, he looked at her. She looked back. He dismounted without ceremony, no waiting for a groom, no performance of arrival, and walked toward her across the uneven ground. He stopped 5 feet away, close enough to speak plainly, far enough to be respectful. He was holding something. Her letter. She knew the envelope immediately. She had addressed it in her own hand. "Miss Carter," he said. His voice was steady, not commanding, not soft. Just direct, the voice of a man who had decided what he was going to say and saw no reason to dress it up. "That's right," she said. He held up the letter. "I rode 3 days to find you," he said, "because you were the first person with the nerve to tell me the truth." The silence that followed was long. Amelia looked at his face and searched it automatically. From long practice for the particular expression that men in positions of power wore when they were about to condescend. The patient look, the tolerant look, the "I've come a long way and I expect to be thanked" look. She didn't find it. What she found was something she hadn't prepared for. He looked tired, in the way of a man who has just discovered that the ground he thought was solid has been hollow underneath him. Not broken by it, not destroyed, but genuinely shaken and not bothering to pretend otherwise. She said, "The documentation is inside. Everything I referenced in the letter, the account books, the falsified reports, the names of the affected families. Do you want to see it?" No hesitation. "Then come in," she said. She turned and walked back toward the house. Behind her, she heard him tell his companions, "Wait here," and then the sound of his boots on the ground. Following her, she put the account books on the table. She poured coffee without asking. She sat across from him and watched him read. He didn't perform anything. He didn't put on the face of a generous man exercising his patience. He simply read, and as he did, she watched the small shifts in his expression. The tightening of his jaw at the falsified figures. The stillness in his eyes when he reached the list of family names. The particular quality of silence that happens someone is confronting something they cannot dismiss. He was on the 3rd ledger when he stopped. He set it down. He looked up at her. "These reports that reached my office," he said slowly. "These numbers were altered before they got to me?" "By at least 2 managers," she said. "Possibly a 3rd. I have correspondence that shows it." "Show me." She slid the folder across the table. He read. The silence in the room was the kind that has weight. Then he said, "I want to ask you something, all right? This letter." He touched the envelope lying beside the ledger. "You said you believe I might not have known. Did you actually believe that? Or did you write it as a diplomatic gesture?" She looked at him steadily. "I genuinely didn't know which was true," she said. A man who knew and ignored it, or a man whose people were keeping him blind. Both are serious. They're just serious in different ways. And now that you've seen me? Now I'm deciding." Something moved across his face, not quite a smile. Not quite, not one. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and his voice was different now, quieter and more careful, the way a man sounds when he's saying something that costs him something. "I didn't know. I want to be clear about that, and I also want to be clear that it doesn't excuse me. A man with my resources not knowing what was being done on land he owned, that's not innocence. That's negligence." He paused. "The failure was mine. I trusted people without looking. I intend to look now." Amelia was quiet. Outside, a wind moved through the grass. "That's either the most honest thing a powerful man has ever said to me," she said, "or the most convincing." "No," he said. "I can't prove which. You'll have to decide for yourself." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and pulled the priority list from beneath the ledger. "The Kellerman family will lose their harvest in 3 weeks if water access isn't restored," she said. "The Birch East field is past the point of repair this season. We can salvage the west. But only if we move now. I have 12 families ranked by urgency. The ones at the top can still be saved. The ones at the bottom," she paused. "The ones at the bottom needed someone to act 6 months ago." She pushed the list toward him. He picked it up. He read every name. When he looked up, his jaw was tight. "Tell me what needs to happen first," he said. And Amelia Carter, who had been sent away to disappear, who had been told in 100 quiet ways that her opinions were a problem and her presence was an inconvenience, leaned forward and told him. They worked through the afternoon. His 2 companions drifted in. Eventually, the suited man was a lawyer named Garrett. The other a land manager named Cole, who'd been with Brooks for 15 years. They sat up at the far end of the table, murmuring between themselves, occasionally interjecting. Nathaniel listened to them when they spoke. He listened to Amelia more. She noticed. She filed it away. At one point she caught a calculation error. In a land survey he was referencing a transposed figure that changed the acreage estimate significantly. "That number's wrong," she said, pointing. He looked at where she was pointing. "You're right," he said, "just that. No irritation. No surprise." He corrected it and moved on. Later, when she said there's something else you need to see and your managers are going to push back on it hard, he didn't brace. Didn't qualify, didn't ask her to soften it first. He just said, "Show me." The afternoon light shifted. Cole leaned over and said something quietly to Nathaniel about the hour. About accommodation in town, about the schedule. Nathaniel glanced at the window. Then back at Amelia. "I'll need to continue this tomorrow," he said. "I'm staying in Willow Creek. I'd like you to be part of the conversations with my managers when we begin the investigation." She looked at him carefully. "Not as a witness," she said. "Not as someone who provides information and then waits outside. No," he said. "As someone whose documentation and whose knowledge of these families are part of the decision-making." "Yes. And the families come first," she said. "Before any question of liability, before any protection of the company's interests, water access is restored, and the most critical situations are stabilized." "That's not a request." Garrett, the lawyer, shifted in his seat. Nathaniel didn't look at him. "Agreed," he said. The room was quiet. Amelia stood up. She extended her right hand across the table. She didn't think about it. She didn't angle it away or turn it or arrange it carefully. She just extended it, the scarred hand, plain as day in the afternoon light, and looked him in the eye. He stood. He took her hand, not with the careful, considerate grip of a man trying not to notice. Just a handshake, firm and level and entirely ordinary. Like she was a person. Like she had always been one. "Tomorrow, then," she said. He agreed. He turned to go. His men gathered their papers at the door. He stopped. He didn't turn around. "Miss Carter," he said. "Yes, the letter you wrote." A pause, not a dramatic one. Just the pause of a man choosing his words honestly. "I've been in business for 15 years. I've received thousands of letters. I've never read one that was written with that kind of precision and that kind of nerve at the same time." He paused again. "I hope you know how rare that is." He walked out. She stood in the doorway of the farmhouse where her family had sent her to disappear. She watched him walk back to his horse in the fading light. Mud-caked and exhausted and somehow more present than anyone she'd met in years. She looked down at her right hand. The scar caught the last of the afternoon sun. She had covered it for 3 years. She had hidden it. Managed it, apologized for it in 100 small ways that she'd told herself didn't count. They counted. She pressed her palm flat against the doorframe, solid wood. Real and warm, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not happiness exactly, not triumph, something quieter than that. Something that felt, for the first time in a very long time, like herself. She went inside. She sat at the table where the account books were still spread open. She picked up her pen. She started making a list of everything that would need to happen tomorrow. She had a feeling tomorrow was going to be a fight. She had a feeling she was ready for it. Nathaniel Brooks had not slept in 3 days. That was not unusual for him. He had built an empire on the particular discipline of pushing past what the body wanted and doing what the situation required. Sleep was a luxury. Rest was something other men needed. He had told himself that for 15 years and had, for 15 years, believed it completely. But lying on the narrow cot in the back room of Willow Creek's only boarding house that first night, staring at the ceiling while his body screamed for rest and his mind refused to quiet, he found himself thinking not about the investigation he was about to launch, not about the managers he was going to have to confront, not about the legal exposure his company now faced. He was thinking about her hand, the scarred one, the one she'd extended across the table without a flicker of hesitation, without angling it away, without doing any of the 100 small accommodating things she could have done and clearly had done before. Many times, because the motion of not hiding it had the deliberate quality of a decision made in advance. He had shaken that hand and felt, somewhere in the back of his mind, a kind of shame he hadn't expected, not pity. He understood instinctively that pity was the last thing Amelia Carter wanted from anyone. Shame. The specific kind that comes when you recognize that someone else has been carrying something that you, with all your resources, all your power, all your carefully managed world, had not even known existed until 4 hours ago. He got up before dawn. He dressed in the dark. He knocked on Garrett's door at 5 in the morning and said, "Through the wood, get coal. I want to be at the Carter property by 6. There was a long pause from the other side of the door. Then Garrett's voice, rough with interrupted sleep. "Sir, it's 6 o'clock, Garrett." Another pause. "Yes, sir." Amelia was already in the field when they arrived. Not waiting for them. Not preparing to receive them. Actually moving between rows of turned earth with a purposefulness that suggested she'd been at it for at least an hour and had not arranged her morning around their arrival. Nathaniel stopped his horse at the fence line. He watched her for a moment. Cole, beside him, said quietly, "She wasn't expecting us this early." "No," Nathaniel said. She wasn't. He dismounted. He walked to the edge of the field. She looked up when she heard the fence gate, and for just a fraction of a second, so brief he almost missed it, something moved across her face. Not surprise exactly. More like the rapid recalculation of someone who had expected one thing and received another. Then it was gone. "You're early," she said. She didn't say it as a complaint. "Just a fact." "I know," he said. "Can we talk while you work?" She looked at him, the kind of look that measures a man without performing the act of measuring him. "You can keep up," she said. "I'll manage." She turned and kept moving down the row. He followed. "I sent a wire this morning," he said, falling into step beside her. "To my regional manager, Aldous Crane. I've asked him to come to Willow Creek." "He'll be here in 2 days, Crane," she said. She didn't look up. "He's the one who signed off on the water diversion permits." Nathaniel stopped walking. She kept moving. "How do you know that?" he said. "Because I found the original permit application in the county clerk's records 3 months ago," she said. Still not stopping. "Crane's signature is on the secondary authorization. Which means either he approved it knowing the full impact, or someone forged his name." She paused at the end of a row. Turned, looked at him directly. "I assumed you'd want to know which." He looked at her. The morning light was flat and gray and completely indifferent. And she was standing in the middle of a muddy field in work boots. Watching him, with an expression,
was patient,
in the way of someone who has learned to wait because they've had no other choice. "You've been building this case for months," he said. 3 months, she said. "Since I confirmed the diversion wasn't natural, why didn't you go to the newspapers first?" "It would have been faster." "Because faster isn't always better," she said. "A newspaper story creates noise. It doesn't fix a river." "I wanted the river fixed. I still do." "Is Crane coming here to explain himself or to manage the situation?" The question was direct enough to cut. Nathaniel said, I haven't decided yet. Then I'd suggest deciding before he arrives, she said. Because the families in this county have been waiting long enough for someone to stop managing their situation and start fixing it. She turned back to her work. He stood in the muddy field in his good coat and his mud-caked boots and felt, very clearly, that he was being held to a standard he had not previously been aware of and had no particular argument against. He pulled off his coat, folded it over the fence post, and said, What needs to be done this morning? She looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. The Kellerman property, she said finally. Northfield. Their irrigation channel is blocked. If we clear it today, they can still pull water before the weekend. Then let's go, he said. She stared. You want to go fix an irrigation channel, she said. You said it needs to be done. I said it needs to be done. I didn't say anything about. She stopped, looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. All right, she said. Saddle back up. It's a 20-minute ride. The Kellerman farm was everything the account books had described and worse in person. Joseph Kellerman was 44 years old, built like a man who had spent his entire life working and had very little left to show for it except the work itself. He came out of the farmhouse when he heard horses and stopped dead when he saw who was with Amelia. His face went through 4 different expressions in about 2 seconds. Then it settled on something hard and very, very careful. Miss Carter, he said. He did not look at Nathaniel. Joe, she said, swinging down from the saddle. We're here about the North Channel. This is Nathaniel Brooks. The hard look on Kellerman's face didn't change. I know who he is, he said. Amelia said. He's here because he's going to hear directly from you what's been happening. And then he's going to help us clear the channel, if that's acceptable to you. Kellerman looked at Nathaniel for the first time. The look was not friendly. With respect, Mr. Brooks, he said. And his voice was the flattest, most carefully controlled sound Nathaniel had heard in years. Your company has been killing my farm for 18 months. I got 4 children in that house. I got a wife who hasn't slept a full night in 6 months because she's scared what we're gonna lose. I'm not real interested in a visit, I know, Nathaniel said. Do know, Nathaniel said. Not the way you know it. But I'm here because I want to understand it, and then I want to fix it. A pause. I'm also willing to work the channel myself this morning, if that means anything to you. Kellerman looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Amelia. She gave him a small, steady nod. He looked back at Nathaniel. Channels in the North Field, he said. Follow me. They worked for 2 hours. Nathaniel Brooks, who had not done physical labor in 15 years, worked beside Joseph Kellerman in the mud, and did not complain and did not stop, and did not treat the work as something beneath him. He didn't perform the work either, didn't make a show of his willingness. Didn't glance around to see if anyone was watching. He just worked, Amelia noticed. She noticed the way Kellerman's body language changed by the end of the first hour, not warmth, not trust, nowhere near forgiveness, but something. A slight loosening. The particular shift of a man who is still angry but has stopped assuming the worst. At one point, Kellerman said, without looking up from the blockage he was clearing, You know what my father told me about your family's company when they first started buying land out here? No, Nathaniel said. He said, Joseph, those men will take everything that isn't nailed down and then come back for the nails. Kellerman pulled a heavy chunk of debris free. I thought he was being uncharitable. Nathaniel was quiet. Was he wrong, he said. Kellerman stopped working. He looked at Nathaniel. I don't know, he said. Ask me in 6 months, and he went back to work. Nathaniel went back to work too. Amelia, watching from 3 feet away, felt something in her chest do a complicated thing, a loosening and a tightening at the same time. The specific feeling of watching someone do the right thing when they didn't have to. She handed Nathaniel the clearing tool without being asked. He took it without comment. Their hands didn't touch. It didn't matter. By mid-morning, the channel was clear, and water was running into the Kellerman North Field for the first time in 4 months. Kellerman stood at the edge and watched it come. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, very quiet, to no one in particular, "My oldest girl planted that field herself, 8 years old. Did every row herself with a hand spade." He paused. "I told her last week it was probably going to be a loss year. Nobody said anything. I'm gonna go tell her it's not," he said, and he walked back toward the house with his shoulders squared and his hands shaking slightly. And Amelia looked away to give him the privacy of that moment. When she looked back, Nathaniel was watching Kellerman walk away with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. She said quietly, "That's what we're fighting for." "I know," he said. "I don't mean the farm," she said. "I mean that. That man walking back to tell his daughter it's going to be all right." She paused. "That's what your managers were willing to destroy for a more efficient water route." He turned and looked at her. "I know," he said again, and this time it sounded different. Heavier. They were riding back toward town when Garrett came galloping up the road toward them with an expression that meant trouble before he opened his mouth. He pulled his horse alongside Nathaniel's and leaned in. "Crane got the wire," he said. "He's not waiting the 2 days. He's on his way now. And he didn't come alone. He brought 3 of the Meridian regional directors and a lawyer I don't recognize." Amelia kept her horse steady. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "How long?" he said. "They'll be here by tonight," Garrett said. He glanced at Amelia, then back at Nathaniel, with the particular look of a man who wants to say something privately and is not going to get the chance. "Sir, I think we should talk about how to approach this before. Miss Carter is part of this conversation," Nathaniel said. "Final." Garrett's mouth closed. Amelia said nothing. But she noted it. Aldous Crane arrived at 6:30 that evening. He was a large man, not tall but wide across the shoulders, with the kind of physical presence that was accustomed to filling a room and had opinions about anyone who didn't step back to accommodate it. He had iron gray hair, a suit that had survived the travel better than Nathaniel's had, and eyes that moved around a room the way a man's eyes move when he's already calculating what needs to be controlled. Those eyes landed on Amelia immediately, and she watched with the particular attentiveness of someone who has spent 3 years learning to read rooms as Crane looked at her, looked at where she was sitting, and made a decision. He smiled. "Miss Carter," he said pleasantly, "I've heard so much about your letter." "I imagine you have," she said. Passionate writing. Clearly someone who cares deeply about the community. The smile stayed exactly where it was. These things can be easy to misinterpret, of course. Emotion sometimes clouds the technical picture. The room was very quiet. Amelia looked at him steadily. "Which figures in my documentation do you believe were affected by emotion?" she said. The smile flickered. "I'm sorry? You said emotion clouds the technical picture." "I'm asking which specific figures or records you believe are inaccurate." "I have the originals here." She touched the ledger on the table beside her. "If there are errors, I'd like to correct them." Crane looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked back at him with an expression that said absolutely nothing. The silence stretched. Then one of the regional directors, a younger man named Holt, sharper looking than the others, said smoothly, "Perhaps we should begin with a broader overview of the company's management structure before we get into specific figures." "We've already done the broader overview," Amelia said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shift in her seat. "Mr. Brooks and I spent the last 2 days reviewing the specific figures. What would help is hearing from Mr. Crane directly why his signature appears on the secondary authorization for a water diversion, that your own internal guidelines required a full environmental impact assessment." For she opened the ledger. Page 47. "The requirement is in the company's own operational manual, published 18 months ago." She pushed the manual across the table. Nobody moved to take it. She left it there. Crane's smile was entirely gone. He looked at Nathaniel. "Nathaniel," he said. His voice had dropped the pleasant register entirely. "I think we need a moment." "Privately, we don't," Nathaniel said. "I strongly recommend." Nathaniel's voice didn't rise. "It didn't need to." She has the documentation, she has the signatures. She has 3 years of records that your office should have been keeping and wasn't. He paused. Answer the question. The room felt like a held breath. Crane looked at Amelia. She looked back at him without expression. He said, the assessment was conducted internally. By whom, she said. By the Meridian Regional Office, and the results, a pause. They were reviewed and determined to be within acceptable parameters. And those results were filed where? Another pause. Longer this time. I'd have to check the records, he said. I have the records, she said. Would you like to see them? He stared at her. In 15 years of working with Nathaniel Brooks, Aldous Crane had faced down lawyers, politicians, rival landowners, state commissioners, and federal land agents. He had never, not once, sat across a table from a woman in work clothes in a farmhouse outside a county town and felt the specific sensation of having no ground left to stand on. He felt it now. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Holt tried twice to redirect the conversation toward legal liability and procedural questions. The unnamed lawyer tried once to suggest that Amelia's documentation, having been gathered without official authorization, might be subject to questions of admissibility. Amelia said, "These are account books and county public records. Anyone can access them. The question isn't whether I had authorization to read public records. The question is why Meridian's internal reports don't match them." The lawyer didn't try again. By the end of the second hour, Crane had stopped fighting the documentation and started shifting his argument. Not our fault. Unforeseen consequences, good faith management decisions made with the information available at the time. By the end of the third hour, Nathaniel had heard enough. He stood up. Everyone in the room went still. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. His voice was quiet and absolute in the way of someone who has finally decided something and is done deliberating. The water diversion is reversed, starting Monday. I don't want a timeline. I don't want a phased approach. I want it reversed. He looked at Crane. You will cooperate fully with the investigation into how these reports were managed. If your name is on something that shouldn't have happened, you will explain it to me in writing with full documentation. He paused. And Miss Carter will be present for every conversation about the management of water rights in this county going forward. As a representative of the affected community, not as a courtesy. As a structural part of this process, Crane said. Nathaniel, you can't be serious about letting a... Careful, Nathaniel said. The word landed like a stone. Crane stopped. The room was absolutely silent. Nathaniel looked at him for a long moment. Careful, he said again. More quietly. Crane looked at Amelia. She met his gaze without expression. He looked back at Nathaniel. He said nothing. Good, Nathaniel said. We'll begin again tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. He picked up his hat. He looked at Amelia. She was already gathering her ledgers. She didn't look up. But she was, he noticed, moving with a kind of energy that hadn't been there at the beginning of the evening, a focused, deliberate movement that had nothing tired about it. She had won that room. She knew it. She wasn't performing the knowledge of it. She was simply moving forward to the next thing. He had seen powerful men win rooms. He had done it himself. He had never seen it done with quite that particular combination of precision and restraint. He picked up his coat, he said quietly, so only she could hear. You were right about Crane. She looked up. About what specifically, she said. That he knew, Nathaniel said. He didn't authorize something he didn't understand. He authorized something he understood completely. She held his gaze. I know, she said. I've known for 3 months. He looked at her. Why didn't you put that in the letter? Because I needed you to come here and see it yourself, she said. A letter can tell a man something. Only the truth in front of him can make him believe it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Is there anything else you've known for 3 months that I should be aware of? She picked up the last ledger. She looked at him with something that was almost a smile. Probably, she said. Get some sleep, Mr. Brooks. Tomorrow's going to be harder than today. She walked past him out the door. She was right. The next morning, Crane moved. Not dramatically, not in any way that could be pointed to directly. But when Amelia arrived at 8 o'clock, Holt was already there, speaking quietly to three men she didn't recognize. And the shape of the conversation, the way it stopped when she walked in, the way the three men looked at her and then at each other told her everything she needed to know. They were going to make it personal. She had expected this. She set her ledgers on the table. She sat down, she waited. The meeting had barely started when Holt leaned forward and said, in the tone of a man producing a reasonable concern, I think it's worth noting for the sake of full transparency that Miss Carter's family has a historical property claim in this county that could potentially represent a conflict of interest in her role here. The room went still. Nathaniel looked at him. Amelia looked at Holt with the steady, measuring expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific card to appear and has already decided what to do when it does. What claim? Nathaniel said. The Carter family farmhouse, Holt said. It sits on land that borders Meridian's water access route. Miss Carter has a personal stake in the outcome of any renegotiation of water rights in this area. He spread his hands in a gesture of openness that didn't reach his eyes. It's not an accusation. Simply a transfer issue, Amelia said. The Carter farmhouse was transferred to my name by my father's estate 14 months ago. It is disclosed in the county property records, which are public, and which I referenced in my original letter to Mr. Brooks, page 3, footnote 2. She didn't open the ledger. She didn't need to. The property borders Meridian's water access route because Meridian owes a water access route that runs adjacent to private farmland, 23 parcels. Not just mine. My ownership of one of those parcels does not constitute a conflict of interest. It constitutes being one of the people your company is harming. Holt opened his mouth. She kept going. If you'd like to argue that anyone with a stake in the outcome of this investigation cannot represent their community's interests, then you'd be removing the right of every affected family in this county to have a voice in what happens to them. She paused. I'd be very interested to make that argument publicly. Holt closed his mouth. Crane at the end of the table looked at the surface of the table. Nathaniel said, "Move I noon." Something had shifted in the room. It wasn't a dramatic shift. Nobody made a speech. Nobody admitted anything large. But the three men who had arrived with Crane and Holt were no longer a unified front. Amelia could see it in the small separate conversations. The slightly different body angles, the way one of them, a quieter man named Reeves, had started looking at her documentation with what appeared to be genuine attention rather than performative skepticism. She caught Reeves' eye during a brief recess. "You've reviewed the Eastern Field reports before," she said quietly. Not a question. He looked at her. "What makes you say that?" he said. "Because when I showed Crane the discrepancy in the seasonal water flow measurements." "You didn't look at the page. You looked at Crane." She paused. "Which means you already knew what was on the page." Reeves was quiet for a long moment. He said very carefully, "Miss Carter, I have a family." "I know," she said. "So does Joseph Kellerman. So does Thomas Birch. So do 21 other people in this county." He looked at her. She looked back. She said nothing else. She let the silence do its work. By the end of the afternoon, Reeves had asked, in the course of what he framed as a procedural clarification, to see the original internal environmental assessment. The one that Crane had said would need to be located. He produced it himself from his own file case. The room went very quiet. Nathaniel looked at the document. He looked at Crane. Crane said nothing. Amelia said nothing. She didn't need to. The document said everything. That evening, Nathaniel came to her farmhouse alone. No Garrett. No co-lawyer. Just him on horseback, arriving at her door as the sun went down, holding his hat in his hand in a way that was not quite formal and not quite casual. She opened the door before he knocked. She had heard the horse. She looked at him. He looked at her. The assessment was suppressed, he said. Reeves confirmed it. Crane knew the diversion would cause damage and authorized it anyway, because it reduced the quarterly operating cost by 11%. I know, she said. You knew that too. I suspected it, she said. I didn't have Reeves. Now you do. He was quiet. She stepped back from the door. Come in, she said. I'll put coffee on. He came in. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd spread account books 2 days ago. The same table where she'd sat alone for 3 years making records. Nobody was supposed to see, and he held his hat in his hands, and he looked like a man who was carrying something heavy and had been carrying it long enough that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like not to. She put the coffee on. She sat across from him. Say what you came to say, she said. He looked up. I'm going to terminate Crane's position, he said. And Holt's. And conduct a full audit of every Meridian regional operation in the state. He paused. That's going to take time, and it's going to create enemies. People who have been profiting from the way things were run are not going to accept this quietly. No, she said. They won't. They're going to push back, he said. And when they do, they're going to look for the weakest point in the argument. He looked at her directly. They're going to come after you, Amelia. It was the first time he'd used her given name. She noticed. She didn't comment on it. I know, she said. I want you to understand what that means, he said. These are men with resources and no particular interest in being fair. They will find every piece of information about you they can find. And they will use it. She was quiet for a moment. They'll say I was sent away because I was unstable, she said. They'll say the scar was from something shameful. They'll say I have a personal vendetta against your company because of the property line. She paused. Did I miss anything? He looked at her steadily. They'll say you manipulated me, he said. That you used the letter to get my attention and the meetings to get my trust, and that none of it was ever really about the families. The room was silent. Amelia looked at him. Is that what you think, she said. He held her gaze. That's what I know, they'll say. She was quiet. Then we make sure the record is clean, she said. Every decision we make in this process, we document it. Every conversation, every agreement, every commitment in writing. With witnesses, they can't distort what's on paper. They can try, she agreed. But I've been keeping records for 3 years and they haven't been able to touch them yet. He looked at her across the kitchen table. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone when he's trying to understand something about them that he can't quite reach, not the facts of them, but the interior fact, the thing that makes them who they are. She met his gaze and didn't look away. Why did you come here tonight? She said. You could have sent Garrett to tell me about Crane. He was quiet for a moment. Because you deserve to hear it from me, he said. And because, she said. He looked at his hat. Because I've been in this business for 15 years, he said slowly. And I have never not once had someone stand in a room with 3 hostile executives and not lose their footing. A pause. You didn't move an inch. She was quiet. I've had practice, she said. At standing in rooms where I'm not supposed to be and refusing to leave. He looked up at her. Something in his expression had shifted, not the professional respect she'd seen in those first meetings, which had been real, but was also something he'd extended deliberately, consciously, as a man choosing to do the right thing. This was different. This was involuntary, she saw it. She looked away first. Drink your coffee, she said. And then go get some sleep. Tomorrow Crane leaves. And the day after that, this county is going to know it. And the day after that, we're going to have a different kind of problem. What kind? He said. The kind where people who've been afraid to hope start hoping, she said. And you need to be ready to not disappoint them. He was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the coffee cup. All right, he said. They sat in the kitchen in the fading evening light, no account books this time. No ledgers, no documentation spread between them, and drank coffee in a silence that was, for the first time, simply quiet. Not the silence of 2 people managing each other carefully. Just quiet. It didn't last long, but it was there. And Amelia Carter, who had learned long ago not to attach too much weight to small things, found herself attaching weight to it anyway. She didn't examine why. Not yet. She had a county to save first. Crane was gone by Friday morning. No announcement. No farewell. He simply wasn't there when the sun came up. His room at the boarding house emptied. His horses gone from the livery stable. His departure as quiet and calculated as everything else about him. The unnamed lawyer had gone with him. Holt stayed. Which told Amelia something she filed away carefully. Holt staying meant someone thought the fight wasn't over. They were right. She found out what was coming the way she found out most things in Willow Creek, through Ruth Haggerty at the post office, who knew everything worth knowing and had decided, somewhere in the past 2 weeks, that Amelia Carter was worth keeping informed. Ruth pulled her aside on Friday afternoon, glanced both ways down the street with the practiced discretion of a woman who had spent 22 years handling other people's private correspondence, and said quietly, "There was a wire this morning, from the state capitol, addressed to Commissioner Hale." Amelia waited. "I didn't read it," Ruth said. Obviously, Amelia agreed, "but I did notice," Ruth said carefully, "that Commissioner Hale spent 45 minutes on the telephone after he received it, and that he had lunch today with the Alderton family and 2 men I've never seen before in this town." She paused. "And that those 2 men arrived on horses with Meridian Land Company branding on the saddlebags." Amelia was very still. "When was the lunch?" she said. "Noon," Ruth said. "They're probably still there." Amelia looked at her. "Thank you, Ruth," she said. "Don't thank me," Ruth said. "Just don't let them win." Amelia was already moving. She found Nathaniel at the boarding house, going over documents with Cole. She walked in without knocking, which made Cole look up sharply and made Nathaniel look up with an expression that had learned, over the past week, to read her arrival as inversion rather than interruption. "Hale is meeting with Meridian representatives right now," she said. "Lunch at the Alderton house. 2 men, I'd wager, came directly from whoever Crane reported to above you." Nathaniel set down his pen. "Above me," he said. "There's no one above me in Meridian's structure. There is if Meridian has investors who aren't on the public filing," she said. "Which I've suspected for 6 weeks. She put a folder on his desk. "I didn't have enough to say it confidently before. I do now. Look at page 3. He looked at page 3. Cole leaned over and looked at page 3. The room was very quiet. Cole said, "How did you get these transfer records?" "County tax filings," she said. "Public record. The shell company that holds 30% of Meridian's western land assets filed amended tax documents 4 months ago. The parent company name is listed in the amendment." She pointed. "That's not Nathaniel Brooks. That's someone else. Someone who's been running operations through Meridian without their name anywhere near the public documentation." Nathaniel looked up at her. "Franklin Garrett," he said, not a question. His voice had gone very flat. She looked at him. "You know him," she said. "He was my father's business partner," Nathaniel said. "For 20 years. He stood up slowly. "He retired from the Brooks estate holdings 8 years ago. Or said he did." The silence in the room was the kind that has a before and an after. Cole said quietly, "Sir, get the horses," Nathaniel said. Cole went. Nathaniel looked at Amelia. "This changes things," he said. "It changes who we're fighting," she said. "It doesn't change what we're fighting for." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "The town meeting. Hale called one for Sunday." "I saw the notice this morning. I saw it too," she said. "He's going to use it to reframe the narrative before we can make the water restoration public. If he controls that meeting, he won't," she said. "Amelia," his voice was careful, "these men are not going to fight fair. If Garrett is behind this, he has connections that go beyond county politics. He will use everything he can find, and what he finds about you." "I know what he'll find," she said. "Let him find it. They'll put it in front of the whole town." "Good," she said. "Then the whole town will be in one room, and so will I." He stared at her. She picked up her folder. "I'll be at that meeting," she said. Will you? He was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Yes, he said. Then we have 2 days, she said. Let's not waste them. She walked out. He stood in the middle of the room for a moment, looking at the door she'd just walked through, and felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years of building an empire and protecting it from every direction. He felt like someone else was holding part of the weight. It was, he realized, an enormous relief. He picked up his coat and followed her. Saturday was the day the rumors started. Not quiet rumors, not the careful whispered kind that circulate in back rooms and dry goods stores. These were deliberate, the kind that move fast, because someone is pushing them. Placed in the right conversations, with the right amount of false reluctance to guarantee they spread. By Saturday morning, half of Willow Creek had heard some version of the story. The version they heard went like this: Amelia Carter, the woman who'd been sent away from her family years ago, for reasons polite people didn't discuss, had written a letter to Nathaniel Brooks not out of concern for the community, but to manufacture a reason for him to come to Willow Creek. She had used the situation, the farmers, the water, the documentation as leverage to get close to a wealthy man. She was, the story implied, exactly the kind of desperate woman that a man of Brooks' standing needed to be warned about. The second version, which arrived by afternoon and was marginally more vicious, added the detail of the scar her family had hidden her. The story went, because there was more wrong with her than just her hand. Because a woman sent away by her own mother had to have given her mother a reason. Amelia heard the second version from Silas Webb, who came to her door Saturday evening with his hat in his hands and his jaw set and his eyes doing the thing they did when he was angry and trying not to show it. People are talking, he said. I know, she said. It's not true, he said. None of it. And I've been saying so to anyone who'll listen. But Amelia, he stopped. Some of them don't want to hear it. Some of them, he stopped again. Some of them want to believe it, she said. Because it's easier than believing a woman like me did something that mattered. He looked at her. His jaw worked. What are you going to do? He said. She was quiet for a moment. I'm going to go to that meeting tomorrow, she said. And I'm going to say what needs to be said in front of every person in this county. They'll listen to Hale, Silas said. He's got the position. He's got the room. Then I'll need to be more convincing than the position, she said. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, You're not going to cover your hand. Are you? Wasn't a question. No, she said, I'm not. He nodded slowly. Don't. He put his hat back on. He said, I'll be there. First row. And I'll bring every farmer in this county who can walk. He left without waiting for her to thank him. She sat alone in her kitchen for a long time after that. She spread both hands flat on the table, the plain one and the scarred one, side by side, and she looked at them in the lamplight, and she thought about her mother's voice. She thought about the parlor on Millbrook Avenue, and the folded napkin and the word arrangements delivered in the tone of a grocery list. She thought about 3 years of waking up alone in this house and deciding, every single morning, to get up anyway. She thought about Joseph Kellerman's daughter planting a field with a hand spade at 8 years old. She picked up her pen. She worked until midnight, organizing everything she had into the clearest, most irrefutable sequence she could construct, every figure, every name, every date, the water diversion timeline, the falsified reports, the suppressed assessment, the shell company and Franklin Garrett's name in the tax amendment. She built it like a case, because tomorrow it would need to be one. Sunday came hard and bright. The town meeting was held at the Willow Creek Community Hall, a large, plain building on the main street that smelled of wood polish and old arguments and had hosted every significant public decision this county had made for 30 years. By the time Amelia arrived, the room was already full. Standing room only, people pressed along the back wall, the air thick with the particular tension of a community that knew it was about to witness something and wasn't sure what. Commissioner Hale was already at the front of the room. He was a broad man with a politician's face, pleasant in a way that required effort. confident in a way that required an audience. He saw Amelia walk in, and something shifted in his expression. Fast and controlled, there and gone. She found Silas in the front row, as promised, flanked by Joseph Kellerman and Thomas Birch and a dozen other farmers she recognized. Silas caught her eye and gave her a small nod. She nodded back. She found a place to stand near the aisle. She did not sit down. Nathaniel was at the back of the room. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to know where he was. She knew he was there. Hale called the meeting to order with the practiced ease of a man who had run many meetings and intended to run this one. "I've called this gathering," he said, in his carrying commissioner's voice, "because there's been a great deal of confusion in this community over the past week. A great deal of rumor, a great deal of outside interference in what are, at their core, local matters, and I think it's time we had a clear, honest conversation about what's actually happening and what the path forward looks like for Willow Creek County." He paused. He let that land, then he said, "I've been in communication with Meridian Land and Water Company's regional representatives. And I want to assure this community that the concerns about water access are being taken seriously at the corporate level and that a management review is already underway." A murmur ran through the room. Hale raised a hand. "I also want to address," he said, more carefully now, "the nature of how this situation became public. Because I think there are some important questions about process, about appropriate channels, and about whether the intervention of certain private individuals has actually served this community's interests or complicated them." He didn't look at Amelia directly. He didn't need to. Every person in the room knew who he was talking about. Amelia felt the room shift, the subtle collective reorientation of people receiving permission to look at something critically. She had felt it before. She knew exactly what it was. She also knew exactly what she was going to do about it. She didn't wait for him to finish. She stepped forward. She walked to the front of the room, not running, not aggressive. Just walking, steady and deliberate, with her ledger under her arm and both hands visible, and no apology in any part of her body. Hale stopped mid-sentence. The room went completely silent. He looked at her. She looked back at him. She turned to face the room. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Commissioner," she said, in a voice that was not sorry at all. "But I think this community deserves to hear the actual information before they decide what kind of process served their interests." Hale said, "Miss Carter, this is not the appropriate. The Black Hollow River diversion was authorized by Aldous Crane, Meridian's regional manager, on March 14th of last year," she said. Not loudly, clearly. The authorization required an environmental impact assessment under Meridian's own operational guidelines. That assessment was conducted. Its results showed projected damage to water access for 23 farming properties in this county. She opened the ledger. The results were suppressed. The diversion was authorized anyway, because it reduced quarterly operating costs by 11%. The silence in the room had a different quality now. Hale said, "I need to caution this meeting against unverified. The assessment is here," she said. She held it up, in Meridian's own hand, signed by their own regional staff, produced from Meridian's own files by one of their own directors. She looked at Hale steadily. "Would you like to call that unverified, Commissioner?" In front of these people, Hale's face was very controlled. She turned back to the room. "The Kellerman family," she said. "Joseph, Margaret, their 4 children, 3 generations on that land. They were 2 weeks from losing their harvest." She looked at Joseph Kellerman in the front row. "Their north field has water running through it today, because the diversion is being reversed. Not because Meridian decided to be generous because they were caught. And because someone made them." She paused. "Thomas Birch. Eastfield is a loss this season. We couldn't save it in time. That's not a management oversight. That's an 18-month decision by people who knew what they were doing and did it anyway." Thomas Birch, in the front row, looked at the floor. She kept going. "Commissioner Hale mentioned outside interference," she said. "I want to address that directly." She looked at Hale again. I am a resident of Willow Creek County. I have been for 3 years. I own property here. I know these families. I kept records because no one else was keeping them. And I wrote a letter because no one else was writing one. She paused. I would like the commissioner to explain to this room what the appropriate channel was for these families. Who should they have gone to? Because they went to his office. 12 months ago. And nothing happened. The murmur in the room had sharpened into something different. Hale said, "Those complaints were received and reviewed." "On what date was Joseph Kellerman's complaint reviewed?" she said. Silence. "On what date was Thomas Birch's filed concern acknowledged in writing?" she said. Silence. "Because I have copies of both," she said. And neither received a response. The room was absolutely still. And then, one of the two men, Amelia, didn't recognize the ones who'd arrived with Meridian saddlebags, stood up from the back of the room. He was younger than she'd expected, with a lawyer's careful posture and a voice designed to sound reasonable in hostile rooms. "Miss Carter," he said, "I appreciate your passion for this community. I think everyone in this room does." His voice was smooth, warm, pitched for sympathy. "But I think it's also important that we acknowledge something. You have a personal stake in the outcome of any renegotiation of water rights in this county. You own property on the border of Meridian's access route. And the relationship you've developed with Mr. Brooks over the course of this investigation." He paused. "I think the community deserves to ask whether that relationship has influenced the process." The room shifted again. Amelia felt it. She did not move. She looked at the man calmly. She said, "Your name?" He blinked. "Excuse me," he said. "Your name," she repeated. "You've stood up in this community's meeting to speak about my character." "I'd like to know who's speaking," he said after a brief pause. "Richard Paulson. Legal representation for Franklin Garrett," Nathaniel said. Every head in the room turned. Nathaniel Brooks was walking from the back of the room toward the front. And the room parted for him, not because he commanded it, but because there was a quality to the way he moved that made space happen automatically. He stopped beside Amelia, not in front of her, beside her. He looked at Paulson. "Franklin Garrett," he said, "who holds 30% of Meridian's western land assets through a shell company that was not disclosed in any public filing. Who has been conducting business through my company's name without my knowledge for at least 2 years. He paused. "Who is, I understand, currently discussing this situation with Mr. Garrett by telephone, which is why you needed to buy time with this line of questioning." Paulson's face had gone carefully neutral. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "you want to question Miss Carter's interests in this room?" Nathaniel said. His voice was quiet and very precise. "Then let's also discuss your and Mr. Garrett's and why a man who publicly Brooks Estate 8 years ago still has a financial stake in its operations." He looked at Hale. "Commissioner, I'd like to formally request that today's meeting be documented in full and that a copy of that documentation be sent to the State Land Commissioner's office." He paused. As a transparency measure, Hale looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting to control a fire and found himself standing inside it. He said, yes, that can be arranged." Nathaniel looked back at Paulson. Paulson sat down. The room breathed. Amelia had not moved an inch. She turned back to the room and said, "I want to say one more thing. And then I'll sit down and let this meeting proceed however Commissioner Hale thinks is appropriate." She looked at the faces, all of them. Every farmer and merchant and neighbor and stranger. "I've heard what's being said about me this week. About why I was sent away. About what's wrong with me. About what my motives are." She paused. "I'm not going to argue with it. People will believe what they want to believe." She held up her right hand, the scarred one, plain and unhidden in the full light of the room. "But I want you to look at this. Because the story going around is that this hand is the reason I was hidden. That this was a flaw serious enough that my own family decided I had no future." The room was completely silent. "Spent 3 years believing they might be right," she said. "And then I stopped, and I started keeping records. And I wrote a letter." She looked at the hand for a moment and then looked back at the room. 23 families have water coming back to their land. Not because anyone powerful decided to be kind, because someone decided that silence wasn't an option anymore. She paused. That's all I came here to do. Make some noise. For people who needed it. She stepped back. She found her place by the aisle. She stood very still and breathed. The room was quiet for a long moment, and then Joseph Kellerman stood up. He was not a man given to speeches. He was a man given to work and silence, and the particular dignity of someone who asks nothing from anyone that he can get for himself. He stood up and he turned to face the room, not the commissioner. And he said in his flat, controlled voice, "My daughter planted that Northfield herself. She's 8 years old. She did every row with a hand spade." He stopped. 3 days ago, she stood at the edge of that field and watched the water come back. And I want this room to know that it came back because of the woman standing over there, who nobody thought was worth listening to. He sat down. That was all he said. But it was enough, because after Kellerman sat down, Thomas Birch stood up, and after Birch a woman named Clara Hess, whose farm was fourth on Amelia's priority list, stood up and said simply that she wanted everyone to know she'd watched Amelia Carter walk through 3 inches to reach her property at 6 in the morning to check her irrigation lines, and that whatever else anyone wanted to say about this woman, they could say it, knowing that. Hale tried twice to redirect the meeting to procedural matters. The room wasn't interested in procedural matters. The room had something else it needed to do. After the meeting, the 2 Meridian men left quickly. Paulson didn't look at Amelia as he went. Hale stayed to manage the documentation request, looking like a man who understood clearly that the ground under his position had shifted and was recalculating accordingly. Nathaniel found her outside. She was standing in the air after the heat and density of the packed room, with her eyes closed and her face turned slightly up, just breathing. She heard his boots and opened her eyes. "The county commissioner's going to cooperate," he said. "He called me over before I left. He's separating himself from Garrett very quickly, now that Garrett's name is in a public record. Rats and ships," she said. "Something like that." He paused. "You were right about the meeting. I usually am," she said. And there was something in her voice, not arrogance, but the dry, quiet version of a woman who has been underestimated for so long that the accuracy of her own judgment has stopped surprising her. He looked at her. She looked back. "Garrett's going to fight this," he said. "Even now. He has lawyers and he has time and he has the particular motivation of a man who does not accept being exposed. This isn't over." "I know," she said. "I'm going to need everything you have on the shell company," he said. "Every record, every document, every thread. We're going to need to build a complete picture before he can bury anything." "I know," she said again. "I already started this morning." He stared at her. "This morning," he said. "You had this morning's meeting to prepare for." "I can do 2 things," she said. He shook his head slowly, not in exasperation, but in the way of a man encountering something that keeps being larger than he measures it, and has stopped being surprised by that, and started simply being awed. "Amelia," she looked at him. "What you did in there," he said. Standing in front of this whole town, he stopped. "I know what it cost." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you?" she said. "No," he said, "not exactly. But I know it cost something." She looked at him, really looked the way she rarely let herself look at him. Without the professional distance she maintained, because it was necessary and safe, and because she was not going to be someone who confused gratitude with something else or mistook a temporary alliance for something permanent. But he was looking back at her with an expression that was none of the things she'd catalogued him capable of. Not professional respect, not admiration from a distance. Something closer and less manageable than either. She looked away. "We need to talk about Garrett," she said. "Yes," he said. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," he agreed. She started walking. After 3 steps she stopped. She didn't turn around. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes," he said. "Thank you," she said. "For standing there." For not, she paused, for standing there. The silence behind her was the comfortable kind. "There's nowhere else I'd have been," he said quietly. She walked on. She did not let him see her face, because her face, just then, was doing something she wasn't ready to name. And she had a Garrett problem to solve, and she was not, she told herself firmly. Practically. With every ounce of the discipline that had gotten her through 3 years alone in a farmhouse, she was not going to think about the tone of his voice just then, or the particular way he'd said nowhere else, or the fact that when she'd stood at the front of that room with her scarred hand in the air, she had, somewhere in her peripheral vision, always known exactly where he was standing. She had a county to finish saving. She kept walking. The Garrett problem did not wait for morning. At 11 o'clock that same Sunday night, Nathaniel's man Cole knocked on Amelia's door with an expression that meant the news was bad and he'd ridden fast to deliver it. She opened the door before he could knock a second time. She'd been awake. She hadn't expected to sleep. "What happened?" she said. "Garrett filed an emergency injunction 2 hours ago," Cole said. "State Capitol. He's claiming the investigation into Meridian's Western land operations constitutes unlawful interference with established contractual rights. He's asking a judge to freeze all changes to water management in this county pending a full legal review." He paused. "The injunction would include the water restoration." Amelia was very still. "The Kellerman field," she said. "If the injunction holds, Meridian can legally suspend the restoration until the case is resolved." Cole's voice was careful, measured, the voice of a man delivering a verdict he personally found unjust. "Cases like this take 18 months, sometimes 2 years." She looked at him. "Where's Nathaniel?" she said. "Boarding house. He got the wire 20 minutes ago. He sent me directly." She grabbed her coat off the hook by the door. "Let's go," she said. She didn't wait for Cole to lead. She already knew the way. Nathaniel was standing at the window when she walked in, which she'd noticed was what he did when he was thinking hard and needed his hands free. He turned when the door opened. He looked at her face and skipped everything that didn't need to be said. "You already know," he said. "Cole told me on the way." She put her folder on the table. "An emergency injunction requires a judge to find immediate irreparable harm to the filing party. Garrett's argument is that reversing the water diversion damages Meridian's established operational infrastructure, which means," she said, "that he's arguing the infrastructure that harmed 23 families is legally protected, because it's been in place long enough to count as established." She sat down. "That's the argument. He's going to say that what we call damage, he calls prior use." "Yes," Nathaniel said again. He sat down across from her. "His lawyers are good. This is going to hold up at the initial filing, which means we have," he glanced at Cole. 72 hours, Cole said. "The injunction takes effect Wednesday morning unless we can get in front of a judge and show cause to vacate it before then." Amelia looked at her folder. She opened it. She pulled out a single sheet she'd been working on since that morning, separate from the main documentation, and set it on the table between them. Nathaniel looked at it. He was quiet for a moment. "This is the original land grant," he said slowly. "From the federal government. 1,847. The Black Hollow River water rights were included in the original land grant to Willow Creek County's founding settlers," she said. "Collectively, not to any individual property owner. Not to any corporation. The water rights were granted as a community commons under the original territorial charter." She paused. "Meridian never had the legal authority to divert them in the first place. Prior use doesn't apply because their use was never lawfully established." The room was absolutely silent. Cole said very quietly, "How long have you had this?" 6 weeks, she said. "I found it in the County Historical Archive when I was looking for something else. I didn't know if it was relevant. I researched it for 3 weeks before I was sure." She looked at Nathaniel. "I didn't put it in the original letter because I wasn't certain yet. And I didn't want to lead with a legal argument I could fully support." Nathaniel was staring at the document. He said, "This vacates the injunction. If we can get it in front of the right judge before Wednesday morning," she said. The state capitol, Cole said immediately. That's a 12-hour ride. Then we leave tonight, Nathaniel said. He was already standing. Amelia stood with him. He looked at her. You should stay, he said. The community needs someone here who I found the document, she said. I understand the argument. You need me in that room. He held her gaze. It's a 12-hour ride, he said, through the night. I'm aware of what 12 hours is, she said. Something moved through his expression, something between concern and the particular expression of a man who has stopped arguing with a force of nature, because he has finally understood it is a force of nature. All right, he said. 15 minutes, bring everything. She was back in 13. They rode through the night with Cole and Garrett, the lawyer. Not the enemy and the darkness and the road, and the particular silence of people who are moving toward something that matters too much for small talk. Amelia rode and did not think about her back aching or her hands stiffening in the cold. She thought about the land grant document in her saddlebag, and the sequence of the argument she was going to need to construct, and the particular kind of judge who would be persuaded by precedent versus the kind who would be persuaded by equity, and how she was going to read the room fast enough to know which approach to lead with. Around the third hour, when the road straightened and the horses settled into a steady pace, Nathaniel pulled alongside her. He didn't say anything immediately. She waited. My father trusted Garrett, he said, for 20 years. He considered him the closest thing he had to a partner. He paused. When Garrett retired, my father said it was the end of an era. He meant it as a compliment. She looked at him in the dark. What made you trust him, she said. After your father. I didn't, he said. That's the thing. I didn't trust him or distrust him. I simply didn't look. He was quiet for a moment. I built something large enough that I needed other people to run parts of it. And I told myself that delegating was the same as managing. It isn't. No, she said. Crane knew, he said. Garrett directed. And I built the machine that made both of them possible. A pause. That's what I've been sitting with. She was quiet for a moment. You came when I wrote the letter, she said. You didn't have to. You could have sent Crane to manage it. You could have had Garrett's lawyers handle the whole thing from the Capitol and never set foot in Willow Creek. Yes, he said. That matters, she said. What you do when you find out matters more than the fact that you didn't know. He looked at her. In the dark, on horseback, in the cold hours of the night. The distance between them was very small. Is that how you see it, he said. It's how I've seen everything in my life, she said. You don't get to choose what you're handed. You only get to choose what you do next. He was quiet for a long time after that. She let him be quiet. Around the 5th hour, when the sky had gone from black to the deep gray that comes just before anything else, he said, What would you have done if I hadn't come? She thought about it genuinely. Gone to the newspapers, she said, made as much noise as I could. Probably lost, but made enough noise that losing would have cost Meridian something, and your family finding out you'd made a public scene? Stopped mattering to me some time ago, she said. When, he said. She thought about that too. The morning I packed my bags, she said. The morning she told me I was leaving. I looked at my mother, and I understood something that the opinion of someone who sends you away to protect their own convenience is not an opinion worth rebuilding your life around. She paused. It took me a while to actually believe it, but I understood it that morning. He said nothing. She glanced over and found him watching her with that expression again, the involuntary one. The one she'd catalogued and set aside and kept finding herself returning to. She looked back at the road. Sleep for an hour if you can, she said. We'll need you sharp when we get there. I don't sleep on horseback. Then at least stop talking, she said. I need to think through the argument. He made a sound that was the closest thing to a genuine laugh she'd heard from him. She kept her eyes on the road. She was smiling. She didn't let him see that either. The state capitol courthouse opened at 8 in the morning. They arrived at 7:40, covered in road dust, and completely awake in the specific way of people who have pushed past exhaustion into something on the other side of it. Garrett, their Garrett, The lawyer had spent the last 2 hours of the ride preparing the motion. He was good. Amelia had revised 3 sections of his argument before they reached the city limits, and he had accepted every revision without complaint, which told her he was both confident enough in his own work not to be threatened by improvement and honest enough to recognize when the improvement was real. The judge they were assigned was a woman named Honorable Margaret Voss. 61 years old, according to the clerk, who whispered her background to Garrett in the hallway. 30 years on the bench, known for being meticulous and impatient with wasted time in equal measure. Amelia decided immediately that she liked her. Paulson was already in the courtroom. He had a team of 3, and the particular well-rested look of a man who had filed his injunction and then slept soundly, certain it would hold until he could argue it properly. He looked at Amelia when she walked in. She looked at him. She set her folder on the table. She sat down. Paulson leaned over to his colleague and said something quietly. His colleague looked at Amelia. Then they both looked away and went back to their papers. Good, she thought. Let them be comfortable. Judge Voss came in, and the room stood, and the room sat, and Voss looked at the papers in front of her with the expression of a woman who had read everything already and was waiting for someone to tell her something she didn't know. Mr. Paulson, she said, your client filed an emergency injunction on the grounds of irreparable harm to established operational infrastructure. You have 15 minutes to convince me. This rises to the standard for emergency relief. Paulson stood. He was good, she had to give him that. He was precise, organized, and made the argument for prior use sound almost reasonable, the kind of careful legal construction that obscures what it's doing by being technically accurate about what it isn't doing. He sat down. Judge Voss looked at the other table. Mr. Garrett, she said. There Garrett stood. He was 4 minutes into a solid presentation when Judge Voss held up a hand. The territorial charter argument, she said. You're claiming the original water rights were granted as a community commons and therefore Meridian's operational use was never legally established in the first place. Yes. Your Honor. That's a significant claim, she said. What's the basis? The original 1,847 federal land grant, Garrett said. Which we have here. He held up the document, and which, we believe, supersedes any subsequent corporate operational use because the community commons designation was never legally transferred or extinguished. Voss held out her hand. He brought it forward. She read it. The courtroom was very quiet. Paulson was not as comfortable as he'd been 5 minutes ago. Amelia could see it in the precise stillness of someone working hard not to show a reaction. Voss looked up. Where did this come from, she said. Garrett said, research conducted by Miss Amelia Carter, a resident of Willow Creek County. She located it in the County Historical Archive approximately 6 weeks ago. Voss looked at Amelia. Amelia met her gaze. Voss said, Are you an attorney? No. Your Honor, she said. Then what are you? A resident of the affected county, she said. Who kept records? Voss looked at her for a moment. Then she looked back at the document. She said, Mr. Paulson, prior use requires lawfully established use. If this grant designation holds, your client's use was never lawfully established. Your injunction has no foundation. She paused. I'm going to need 48 hours to verify the charter's applicability. But I am not granting emergency effect to your injunction in the meantime. Water restoration in Willow Creek County may proceed. She set down the document. We'll reconvene Thursday morning. Paulson stood. Your Honor, you may not, Voss said. We're adjourned. She left. Paulson stood at his table and looked at the space she'd occupied. Then he looked at Amelia. She was already gathering her papers. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Outside the courthouse, in the bright morning air of the state capitol, Nathaniel stopped walking and turned to face her and said, You've had that document for 6 weeks. Yes, she said. You rode 12 hours through the night to use it. It was the right time to use it, she said. If I'd shown it earlier, Garrett Franklin Garrett would have had time to challenge it. Bury it, find a counter-argument. This way he had 8 hours' notice and no room to maneuver. He stared at her. You planned this, he said. I planned for the possibility, she said. There's a difference. He shook his head slowly. Not in disbelief, she said. We should get back. Thursday's hearing is going to be harder. He'll have time to prepare a response to the charter argument. I know, he said. He wasn't moving, Amelia. What do you want? He said. When this is over, when the investigation is complete and the water is running and Garrett is dealt with. What do you actually want? The question landed somewhere she hadn't expected. She was quiet for a moment. I want the farmhouse, she said. I want to stay in Willow Creek. I want to keep working with the families there. She paused. I want whatever work we've built here to keep standing after you've gone back to Harlan County. He looked at her. I've been in Willow Creek for 2 weeks, he said. I haven't once thought about going back to Harlan County. She looked at him carefully. Don't say that, she said quietly, if you don't mean it. I mean it, he said. Nathaniel. Her voice was steady and careful, and doing the work of not breaking. I am not a project. I am not a cause. I know what you are, he said. Do you? You are the most precise, most stubborn, most completely unmanageable person I have encountered in 15 years of meeting people who thought they were formidable. He paused. And you are the only person I have met in 15 years who made me feel like the ground under my life might actually mean something. Another pause. I'm not saying this as a declaration. I'm saying it because you asked me not to say things I don't mean. And this is what I mean. She looked at him in the morning light of the state capitol, covered in road dust, exhausted in the way of people who have just won something at significant cost. And she felt something in her chest do the thing she had been carefully not letting it do for 2 weeks. She said, we have a Thursday hearing to prepare for. Yes, he said. And a county to get back to. Yes, he said. And you need to eat something. You haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon. That's true, he said. He was almost smiling. Are you going to feed me? I'm going to find a restaurant, she said. And then we're going to talk about the Thursday argument. She started walking. Don't read into the restaurant. Of course not, he said. He was definitely smiling now. She kept her face forward. She was smiling too. Thursday came and Voss held for them. The 1,847 land grant was valid. The community commons designation had never been legally transferred. And Meridian Land and Water Company's operational use of the Black Hollow River diversion was ruled unlawful. The injunction was denied with prejudice. Paulson filed an appeal within the hour. Nathaniel's legal team filed their counter the same afternoon. Franklin Garrett, who had been conspicuously absent from every proceeding, issued a statement through his lawyers calling the ruling procedurally flawed and the documentation suspect. The statement was 3 pages long and said nothing that the documentation didn't directly contradict. Amelia read it once. She filed it in a folder marked Garrett Responses and went back to work. Because the legal victory, as she had always known, was only part of it. The other part that actually mattered on the ground, in the fields, in the lives of the families who had been waiting, was the work itself. The restoration of the water system. The documentation of damages for the families who qualified for restitution. The conversations with each farm, one by one, about what had been lost this season and what could still be saved. Nathaniel did not go back to Harlan County, he stayed. He worked, not in the visible public way of a man performing generosity. He worked the way Amelia worked quietly, methodically, showing up where he was needed and not making a production of it. He sat at kitchen tables with farmers and listened. He made decisions and then did the follow-through. He stopped asking Garrett or Cole to be the face of things and started being the face of them himself. Silas Webb noticed. He mentioned it to Amelia one morning. Without particular ceremony, while they were both checking the water levels in the restored irrigation channels. Your man Brooks is different than I expected, he said. He's not my man, she said. Silas gave her a look that communicated, without words, that he was 63 years old and had been married for 40 of them, and was not going to engage with that statement. "He's different than I expected," he said again. "Rich men who come to fix things usually want to be seen fixing them. He just fixes them." She thought about Nathaniel at the Kellerman farm, in the mud with his good coat folded over the fence post. "Yes," she said. Silas didn't say anything else. He was good at that, at saying enough and stopping. She looked at the water running clear and steady through the channel. She thought about what Nathaniel had said outside the courthouse. "The only person who made me feel like the ground under my life might mean something." She had filed that away too. She was running out of places to file things. The restitution process took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of documentation, of meetings, of negotiations between Nathaniel's estate lawyers and the affected family's representatives, Amelia functioning as the community's anchor throughout. The person every family came to first, the person who translated between what the legal process required and what the farmers needed to hear in plain language. It was the hardest work she had ever done. It was also, she understood somewhere around the 4th week, the first work she had ever done that felt entirely and completely like herself. Not managed, not hidden, not performed for anyone's approval or shaped around anyone's comfort. Just her, doing what she was good at for people who needed it. Around the end of the 5th week, her mother wrote. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Amelia recognized the handwriting immediately, the precise, controlled script of a woman who had strong opinions about penmanship as a reflection of character. She set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a while before she opened it. Her mother had heard about the town meeting, about the courthouse, about the investigation. The letter did not apologize. Her mother was not a woman who apologized. But it was the closest thing to an apology that Eleanor Carter was capable of constructing, which was to say it acknowledged, in careful indirect language, that certain decisions had perhaps been made without full information, and that Amelia's conduct had been, in her mother's estimation, commendable. Amelia read it twice. She folded it. She put it back in the envelope. She was quiet for a long time. Then Nathaniel knocked on her open door. She'd stopped locking it sometime in the 3rd week, which she'd noticed and not examined, and looked at her face and said, "Without preamble, bad news. My mother wrote," she said. He came in. He sat down. He didn't ask what the letter said. She appreciated that. She said commendable, Amelia said after a moment. "My conduct was commendable." He was quiet. "How do you feel about that?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "I thought I wanted her to say she was wrong," she said slowly. "I thought for 3 years that what I needed was for her to say out loud that she was wrong and I was right." She paused. "But reading this, I think what I actually needed was to stop needing her to say it." A pause. "And I already did that. Somewhere in the past 6 weeks. I already did that without noticing." He looked at her. "Good," he said quietly. "It doesn't feel triumphant," she said. "I thought it would." "No," he said. "Those things never do. They just feel quiet, like something that used to take up a lot of space has moved out." She looked at him. "Is that from experience?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "My father built everything I inherited," he said. "And I spent the first 10 years running it, trying to prove I could do it as well as he did. Trying to be what I thought he wanted." He paused. "It took me a long time to understand that what I was actually doing was avoiding the question of what I wanted." He looked at his hands. "Garrett helped me avoid that question for 2 more years. By making it easy to not look." He paused. "I'm looking now," she said. "What do you see?" He looked up at her. "This," he said simply. "This county." He stopped. "You." The room was very quiet. She looked at him across her kitchen table, in the house where she had been sent to disappear, and had instead become the most herself she had ever been. And she felt the last of the carefully maintained distance close. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a declaration, or any of the things that stories like to assign to moments like this. Just quietly, like something that had always been true becoming visible. "I am not easy," she said. "I want to be clear about that before anything else is said. I am not easy, and I am not going to become easy, and anyone who tries to manage me will find that an exhausting project." "I know," he said. He looked almost amused. "I've been finding it an exhausting project for 6 weeks and I haven't stopped once. I keep records," she said, "of everything I've noticed. And I will not leave Willow Creek," she said. "This is my work, these are my people. Whatever comes next for either of us, I am here," he said. "I'm not asking you to leave." "What are you asking?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm asking," he said carefully, "if there's a version of what comes next, where I'm part of what you're building here. Not running it, not funding it." He paused. "As an equal partner, the way we agreed to be at the beginning." She looked at him. "You said you'd never arranged a partnership with someone you'd known for 4 hours, she said. "And you said neither had you," he said. "And you did it anyway." She held his gaze. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, the same grass she'd stood in 3 years ago on the first morning, taking inventory of what she had and what she didn't. She had a great deal more now. "All right," she said. He waited. "All right," she said again, "partner." She extended her right hand across the table. The same hand scar. In the same kitchen. On the same table, where 2 weeks ago she had spread account books for a man she hadn't yet trusted and told herself it was only strategy. He took it. Not a handshake this time, he held it. Just for a moment, just the length of a breath, and then released it and sat back and looked at her with an expression that was unguarded in the way of someone who has stopped performing, being fine, and is simply, actually fine. "We have 17 remaining restitution cases to finalize," she said. "I know," he said. "And the Garrett appeal is still pending." "I know. And someone needs to talk to the County Road Commission about the access routes to the eastern farms before winter." "I'll do the Road Commission," he said. "You finish the restitution cases. We'll deal with the appeal together." She looked at him. "You're going to be very irritating to work with," she said. "Probably," he said. "You're going to be completely insufferable." "Yes," she agreed. She opened her ledger. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. He pulled a chair around to her side of the table and picked up his own papers and did the same. They worked until late into the evening, side by side at the kitchen table in the farmhouse, where they had first laid account books between them, like a bridge neither of them had planned to cross. The lamp burned steady, the wind moved outside, and Amelia Carter, who had been sent away to a place where she would be quiet and invisible and easy to forget, sat in her own kitchen doing her own work beside someone who had chosen deliberately, repeatedly caused to see her exactly as she was. She did not look up from her ledger, but once, sometime past 9 o'clock, when he reached across to point out a discrepancy in the eastern farm figures, and his hand passed close to hers on the table, she felt the warmth of it and did not move away. She kept working. She let herself feel it, both things at once. She thought was enough. That, she thought, was everything. The Garrett appeal was heard on a Thursday in November. Amelia knew it was going to be different from the moment she walked into the courtroom and saw who was sitting in the gallery. Not lawyers, not land agents, not the usual assembly of men in expensive suits who attended these proceedings to watch the outcome and report back to whoever was paying them. Farmers, 17 of them, in their good clothes, the clothes they wore to church and funerals, and the occasions that required them to present themselves to the world as something more than the work they did every day. Joseph Kellerman in the second row, his wife Margaret beside him. Their oldest daughter, the one who had planted the north field with a hand spade, sitting straight-backed at the end of the row with the particular dignity of a child who understood she was witnessing something important. Silas Webb in the front row, as always, his arthritic hands folded on his knee. Thomas Birch, Clara Hess, 11 others whose names and farms and damaged seasons Amelia knew by heart because she had written them into ledgers and carried them to courthouses and refused to let them become statistics in someone else's report. They had come, all of them, without being asked. She stood at the front of the room and looked at them and felt something move through her chest at that she couldn't entirely name, something but gratitude and the specific weight of responsibility. The knowledge that the thing you are carrying belongs to more people than yourself. Nathaniel was beside her. He leaned over slightly and said, quietly, "Did you know they were coming?" "No," she said. He looked at her face. He said, "Yes," she said. She wasn't going to cry in a courtroom. She had rules about that. "Let's finish this." She sat down. She opened her ledger. She got to work. Paulson had spent 6 weeks preparing his appeal, and it showed. He had found 3 legal scholars willing to submit written opinions challenging the territorial charter's applicability to modern water rights law. He had a property historian who argued that community commons designations from 1847 federal land grants had been superseded by subsequent state legislation. He had documentation suggesting that Willow Creek County itself had, in 2 separate instances in the 1880s, treated water rights as individual property rather than community commons, which he argued constituted a practical extinguishment of the original designation. It was a better argument than Amelia had expected. She had expected a better argument than his last one. She had prepared accordingly. Their Garrett presented first. He was solid, precise, and got through his core argument cleanly. The 1847 designation was valid. The subsequent 1880s instances Paulson cited were individual disputes over irrigation access, not transfers of the underlying commons right. The distinction between access rights and the fundamental water commons was well established in territorial law. Paulson went next. He was 40 minutes into a careful, methodical dismantling of the commons argument when Judge Voss held up her hand. "Mr. Paulson," she said, "your property historian argues that the 1882 Birch County irrigation dispute constitutes practical extinguishment of the commons designation. I've read the original case record." She held it up. The presiding judge in 1882 explicitly stated in his ruling that the dispute concerned individual access rights only and did not affect the underlying commons status of the water source. She set it down. Your historian apparently did not read the original case record. Paulson was quiet for exactly 1 second. "Your Honor, the interpretation of that ruling is what it says," Voss said. "Mr. Garrett, your response to the scholarly opinions on the territorial charter's applicability?" There Garrett stood. He spoke for 12 minutes. When he sat down, Voss looked at both tables. "Miss Carter," she said. Every head in the room turned. Amelia stood. She had not been scheduled to speak. She was not a lawyer. She had no official standing in these proceedings beyond the documentation she had provided. Voss said, "You found the original land grant?" "Yes." "Your Honor. And the 1882 case record?" "Yes, Your Honor." 6 weeks ago, when I was preparing for the possibility of this appeal." Voss looked at her for a moment. "Is there anything in your research," she said, "that is not already in front of this court?" Amelia reached into her folder. She had debated this moment for 3 days, whether to use it, whether the proceedings were clear enough without it, whether introducing it would be seen as overreach from someone with no legal standing. She had decided that the families in the gallery had not put on their good clothes and ridden into the state capitol to watch her hedge. She produced a single document and walked it to the clerk. "This is a letter," she said, "written by Aldous Crane to Franklin Garrett, dated 14 months ago. It was provided to me by Director Reeves, who was present at the initial investigation meetings in Willow Creek. The letter discusses the water diversion plan and includes the following sentence." She did not read it aloud. She looked at the judge. "Your Honor, the letter specifically references the 1847 land grant and states that the grant's commons designation represents a, quote, known legal vulnerability that should be managed before the diversion proceeds." The courtroom was absolutely silent. "They knew," she said, "before the diversion was authorized, before the assessment was suppressed, before a single family in Willow Creek County lost a season's harvest, they knew about the land grant." They knew the diversion might not be lawfully authorized. And they proceeded anyway. She paused. That is not a management error. That is not an oversight. That is a deliberate decision to proceed with an action that the decision-makers themselves believed might be unlawful, and to manage the legal risk rather than address it. She walked back to her table. She sat down. Paulson was on his feet. Your Honor. This letter was obtained, how Voss said, looking at Amelia. Voluntarily provided by a Meridian director, Amelia said, who was present when the letter was discussed in an official investigation meeting convened by Mr. Brooks. It was not obtained through any unauthorized means. Voss looked at Paulson. Do you dispute the letter's authenticity? She said. Paulson looked at the letter. He looked at Garrett, the lawyer, who was reading it with an expression of a man who had just received an unexpected gift and was trying not to show it. Paulson looked at Voss. I would need to have 5 minutes, Voss said. I'm going to step off the bench. When I return, I want yes or no on authenticity. She left. The room erupted. Paulson huddled with his team. Garrett leaned over to Amelia and said, very quietly, where's that been? My inside jacket pocket, she said. He stared at her. The whole time? Since Tuesday, she said. I wasn't sure I'd need it. From the gallery. She heard Silas Webb's voice, not loud, just carrying say to the person beside him. Told you. Voss came back in 7 minutes. Paulson confirmed the letter's authenticity. He had no choice. Crane's signature was on it. Franklin Garrett's name was in it. Disputing it would require claiming the signature was forged, which would open a different and considerably worse set of problems. Voss ruled within the hour the appeal was denied. The Commons designation held. The water diversion was permanently and irrevocably unlawful. She also, in language Amelia had not anticipated and sat very still while hearing, referred the question of deliberate legal risk management to the State Attorney General's office for review as a potential matter of bad faith commercial conduct. That was not a civil matter. That was the beginning of something considerably more serious for Franklin Garrett. The room took a moment to understand what had happened. Then Joseph Kellerman stood up. He didn't say anything. He just stood up, and then Margaret Kellerman stood beside him. And then their daughter, and then Silas Webb slowly, with his bad joints and his 40 years of watching water, stood up in the front row. One by one, every farmer in that gallery stood up. Not applauding, not cheering, just standing quietly. The way people stand when they want something to be witnessed. Amelia looked at them. She pressed her right hand flat on the table in front of her, the scarred one. The one that had been the reason for everything that came before, and she breathed. Nathaniel beside her said nothing. He reached over and covered her hand with his. Just for a moment. Then he let go. She looked at him. He was looking at the farmers standing in the gallery. His jaw was working in the way of someone who is feeling something large and is not particularly practiced at receiving it. She looked back at the room too. She let herself feel it. All of it. Franklin Garrett's legal situation deteriorated rapidly after that. The Attorney General's review opened within 2 weeks. 3 of Meridian's regional directors, Reeves among them, provided testimony. Crane, facing the weight of his own signature on a document that proved prior knowledge, agreed to cooperate in exchange for a negotiated settlement. Paulson withdrew from representation, and a new set of lawyers arrived. And then they withdrew too, and then Franklin Garrett, who had spent 40 years operating through other people's names and other people's companies, found himself for the first time standing in his own. It did not suit him. He settled. The settlement terms were not public. But Nathaniel told Amelia what they contained on a Tuesday evening in her kitchen, reading from the document, and she listened to each clause with the focused attention of someone checking off a list she had been keeping in her head for months. Full water rights restored to Willow Creek County in perpetuity, governed by the original Commons designation. Restitution payments to 23 farming families calculated on actual documented losses. Not Meridian's preferred estimate. A county infrastructure fund. Funded by the settlement for road repair and irrigation maintenance over the next decade. Crane terminated. Holt terminated. 4 other regional managers terminated. Garrett removed from any operational role in Brooks' estate holdings. Present or future. Nathaniel closed the document. He looked at her. She looked at the table. She was quiet for a long time. "It's enough," she said finally, not triumphantly. "It's enough for them, yes," he said. "Thomas Birch's Eastfield is going to take 2 seasons to fully recover," she said. "The restitution helps, but it doesn't replace what was lost." "No," he said. "It doesn't. The Kellerman children missed a year of good harvest," she said. "That's a year of savings, a year of security, a year of..." She stopped. "Amelia," he said. "It's enough," he said. The same words she'd used. Returned to her, she held his gaze. "I know," she said. "I just wanted to say it out loud." "What wasn't replaced?" She nodded. She closed her own ledger. She looked at her hands on the table, both of them. The plain one and the scarred one, and she thought about the morning she had walked into the post office and slapped an envelope on the counter and told Ruth Haggerty to send it before she changed her mind. She thought about how afraid she had been, how her hands had shaken on the walk home. How she had kept walking anyway. "What are you thinking?" Nathaniel said. "I'm thinking about the letter," she said. "The one you wrote to me. The one I burned 3 times first," she said. He was quiet. "I was so afraid," she said. It was the first time she had said that out loud to him. To anyone. Not of Meridian or Garrett or the legal risk or any of it. She paused. "I was afraid that I was wrong, that the families would see me try and fail, and they'd be worse off than before because at least before they still had the option of trying. And once I acted, that option was used." He said nothing. "I sat in this kitchen," she said, "with that letter in my hands. And I told myself every reason it was foolish. And then I put my coat on and walked to the post office anyway." She looked at him. "Because I couldn't find a reason that was bigger than 23 families." He looked at her for a long moment. "And now," he said, she thought about it honestly. "Now I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that the most important decision I ever made was one I made in the dark. Half certain it was going to fail, because the alternative was staying quiet." A pause. "And I'm thinking that's true of most things that matter." He held her gaze. "It is." The kitchen was quiet. Outside. The first real cold of November had settled in, and Willow Creek County was buttoning itself down for winter, the farms closing up their last harvests. The families putting stores by, the particular industry of people who have made it through a hard season and are not taking that for granted. Amelia thought about all of them. She thought about Silas Webb's hands, and the Kellerman girls' hand spade, and Thomas Birch's Eastfield, and Ruth Haggerty pressing a stamp down with the force of a woman making a decision of her own. She thought about all the people who had been part of this without their names being on any of the documents. "I want to do something," she said. Nathaniel waited. "The county infrastructure fund," she said. "Part of it needs to go to the road commission immediately." "You're right about that. But part of it, I want to use part of it to create something permanent. A land stewardship office, someone whose job it is, officially and continuously, to maintain the records, manage the water rights documentation, advocate for the farming community with the county and state." She paused. "So that if someone like Garrett tries this again in 20 years, there's already someone in the room." He was quiet for a moment. "That would require staffing," he said. "Funding structure. County approval." "I've been thinking about the funding structure for 3 weeks," she said. "I have a proposal." He almost laughed. "Of course you do," he said. "Do you want to see it?" "Tomorrow," he said. "Tonight I want to sit here for 10 minutes without a ledger open." She looked at him. She closed the ledger. 10 minutes, she said. 10 minutes, he agreed. They sat, the lamp burned, the wind moved outside. And for 10 minutes, Amelia Carter, who had learned every lesson she knew about life in the hard and useful school of being underestimated, sat in her own kitchen and did nothing except exist in it wholly, quietly, without managing or calculating or planning the next move. It was, she thought, the hardest thing she had learned to do. And the most important. She went back to her family city in December. Not because she was summoned. Not because she had decided to forgive anything on anyone else's schedule. She went because she had something to say, and she had decided the time was right to say it. And Amelia Carter had learned, over the past year, to trust her own sense of timing. Nathaniel offered to come with her. She said no. "This is mine," she said. "I need to do it myself." He looked at her steadily. "All right," he said. She went. She arrived on a Tuesday. In the clothes she wore for important work, not her best dress. Not the careful presentation of someone trying to impress, but the clothes of a woman who has a full life and is fitting this into it. She walked up the steps of the house on Millbrook Avenue and knocked on her own family's door and waited. Her mother opened it. Eleanor Carter looked at her oldest daughter at the road dust still on her coat, at the posture that had not been there 3 years ago, at the right hand holding a leather satchel with no glove and no apology, and something moved across her face that Amelia couldn't entirely name. "Amelia," her mother said. "Mother," she said, "may I come in?" She was shown into the parlor. Her sister Clara was there, which she hadn't expected. Clara was 20 now, newly married to her railroad heir. Seated on the settee with the careful posture of a young woman still learning how to occupy her own life. She looked at Amelia with an expression that was complicated and young, something between guilt and admiration, and the particular discomfort of a person confronting the cost of a choice they didn't make, but benefited from. Amelia looked at her sister. She said, "I'm not here about what happened." Clara's shoulders dropped slightly. "I know that wasn't your decision," Amelia said. "I know you were 17, Clara said. Quietly, I should have said something. "Yes," Amelia said. "You should have," she paused. "But 17-year-olds often don't." "I wouldn't have either." She sat down. "I'm not here about the past," her mother said. From the other chair, "Why are you here?" "Because I wanted you to know," Amelia said. "That I'm well. That I have work I care about, and people I'm responsible to, and a life in Willow Creek that I built and intend to keep." She paused. "And because I wanted to say in person that what you did was wrong. Not because it hurt me, though it did, but because it was wrong. The premise of it. The idea that a woman's worth is a thing that can be damaged and hidden and managed." She looked at her mother steadily. "I needed to say that to your face." Her mother was very still. "Amelia, I'm not finished," she said, not harshly. "Just clearly. I also want to say that I don't need anything from you. Not an apology, not acknowledgement, not a relationship we don't actually have. I came here to say what was true, and I've said it. And that's enough for me." She paused. "If you want to know about my life, I'm willing to tell you. If you want to know about the work in Willow Creek, or the families there," she paused, "or Nathaniel, I'll tell you that too. But only if you want to know because you're actually interested. Not to manage how it reflects on this family." Her mother looked at her for a very long time. Then she said, very quietly, and Amelia had to give her credit. Had to acknowledge that it cost her something, because she could see it costing her. "I would like to know." The room was quiet. Clara said from the settee. "So would I." Amelia looked at her sister. She thought about 17 years old and a parlor and a decision made by someone else that Clara had sat still for because she hadn't found her own courage yet. She thought about herself at 22, packing a bag and not looking back. She thought about how long it had taken her to understand that courage wasn't the absence of fear. "All right," she said. She stayed for 2 hours. She told them about Willow Creek. About Silas and the Kellerman family, and Thomas Birch and Ruth Haggerty, and the letter she had burned 3 times before she sent it. She told them about Nathaniel arriving covered in mud with her letter in his hand. She told them about the town meeting and Judge Voss and the farmers standing up in the gallery in their good clothes. She did not make it small. She did not manage it for their comfort. She told it the way it was, and she watched her mother's face as she listened, watched the controlled, managing expression slowly give way to something underneath it that was, she thought, genuine. When she finished, her mother said, "After a long silence, you were never weak, no," Amelia said. "I wasn't." Her mother stopped. "I know what you thought," Amelia said. "You were wrong." Her mother looked at her hands. "Yes," she said, "I was. It was not a full accounting. It was not everything that needed to be said between them, or perhaps everything that would ever be said, but it was real." And Amelia Carter had learned, over the past year, that real was worth more than perfect. She stood up. She put on her coat. "All right," she said. "If you want to hear," her mother stood. For a moment, just a moment, she looked like a woman who wanted to reach out and didn't know if she had the right. Amelia made the decision for her. She stepped forward and embraced her mother briefly. Firmly, without ceremony, her mother's arms came up. They held each other for exactly 3 seconds. Then Amelia stepped back. She picked up her satchel. She said goodbye to Clara, who caught her hand at the door, her right hand, the scarred one, and held it for a moment and said, "I'm sorry, Amelia." "I know," Amelia said. "Grow into your courage. You still have time." She walked out of the house on Millbrook Avenue. She walked down the steps. She did not look back. Not because she was angry. Not because there was nothing there worth looking at. But because she was walking forward now, and forward was the direction that mattered. The Land Stewardship Office opened in February. Amelia ran it, not from a distance, not as a figurehead, but actually and daily: the records, the advocacy, the conversations with county officials and state representatives and the families themselves. She had a desk and a proper file system, and an assistant. She hired a young woman of 20 from the edge of the county who was sharp and underestimated and had been told by more than one person that she wasn't quite suited for serious work. Amelia hired her on the spot. The county commissioner, the same Hale who had lunched with Meridian men and looked the other way, was replaced in the spring election by a man named Davis who had been farming Willow Creek land for 30 years. And had stood up in the gallery in his good clothes. He and Amelia did not agree on everything. They agreed on enough. The Kellerman Northfield produced its best harvest in 4 years that summer. Joseph Kellerman sent her a jar of preserves and a note that said, in his flat handwriting, "My daughter says to tell you thank you." I say it too. She kept the note in her desk drawer. She kept it for a long time. On a warm evening in late spring, Nathaniel came to find her at the office, not the farmhouse, but the actual office, with its desk and its filing system and its window that looked out over the main street of Willow Creek. He had been in Harlan County for 10 days. She had not made a production of his absence. She had worked. She looked up when he came in, and something in her chest did the thing it still did when he walked into a room, the thing she had stopped pretending she didn't notice. "How was it?" he said. He sat down across from her desk, which was not the same as her kitchen table, but had the same quality of a place where things got decided. "The estate restructuring is complete. Meridian is dissolved. The Western land holdings are being managed directly under the Brooks name, with a board that includes 3 community representatives. From the affected counties?" "From the affected counties," he said. "Your I'd used it. It was the right structure," she said. "Yes," he said, "it was." He looked at her. "I also did something else while I was there." She waited. "I have a proposal," he said. She looked at him. He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. She stared at it. She said, "A letter," he said. "You wrote me a letter." "I did." He set it on the desk between them. "I thought it was the appropriate medium." She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. She picked it up. She opened it. It was 1 page. His handwriting, which she had learned over the past months, was precise and slightly cramped on the left margin. The handwriting of someone who thought faster than they wrote and was always slightly impatient with the gap. She read it. It was not long. It was like the best things he said to her. precise and direct and entirely without performance. She read it twice. She set it down. She looked at him across the desk. "You want to stay," she said. "In Willow Creek?" "Yes." "Permanently?" "Yes." She looked at the letter again. "As a partner in the land stewardship work." And she stopped. And he said. She looked at him. "This is a very unusual proposal," she said. "I'm aware," he said. "I thought about writing something more conventional, and I couldn't make myself do it." It felt dishonest. She pressed the letter flat on the desk with her right hand. The scar caught the evening light. "You understand," she said carefully, "that I will not be managed. I know that the work comes first. I know that I keep the records. I run the office, and my name is on everything I build. I wouldn't have it any other way," he said. "And I mean that exactly as literally as it sounds." She looked at him. He looked back. He had ridden 3 days through hard country to find her when he could have sent lawyers. He had stood in a muddy field at 6 in the morning when he could have stood at a comfortable distance. He had said in a courtroom and a town meeting and 100 small moments in between. Exactly what he meant and nothing else. She picked up her pen. She turned the letter over. She wrote 2 words on the back. She slid it across the desk. He looked at it. "Partner." He looked up at her. She was already reaching for her ledger. "I have 3 county reports due by Friday," she said. "And Davis wants to talk about the Eastern Road assessment next week. And I need to review the stewardship fund allocations before the end of the month. I'll take the road assessment," he said. "You hate the road commission." "I do, Ed. I'll do it anyway." "Good," she said. She opened the ledger. He pulled his chair around to her side of the desk. Outside, Willow Creek County was going about its evening, the ordinary business of people living their lives in a place where the water ran clean and the land records were kept honest and someone was paying attention. They worked, side by side, in the office that had her name on the door. That she had built, that she was keeping. Amelia Carter had been sent away to disappear. She had disappeared into something instead, into work that mattered. Into a life that was entirely her own, into the knowledge, hard-won and unshakable, that a woman's worth was not a fragile thing to be managed and hidden and protected from other people's eyes. It was a fact, permanent as a land grant, clear as water running where it was always meant to run. And no one, not her mother, not Garrett, not the whole weight of every room that had ever looked at her and decided she wasn't worth the space she took up, no one had ever had the power to change that. They had only ever had the power to make her prove it. She kept on proving it every single day.